the sisters feel good. Treat them like a good brother should. And they will love you more and more each day in a respected way. In a respected way. In a respected way. Yes, yes, yes. In a respected way. Yes, respected way. Respected way now. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Yes.
Another sound is dying. I know. Ring the alarm. Another sound is dying. Let me hear you sing. Hey, ring the alarm. Another sound. Whoa, hey, just ring the alarm. Another sound. Alright. Yes, some sound so like a big town. Listen the sound, the champion. Rock the dance in any session. Rock up the woman, rock up the man. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Oh, ring the alarm, another sound is suffering. Oh, hey, Tita told me them on in a row. Donkey want water but you're holding low. Tita told me them all in a row. The cost want water but 13 toes. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Oh, hey, just ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Some sound so like a big old man. Listen the sound, the champion. Rock the dance in any session. Rock up the woman, rock up the man. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. You don't know. Remember this sound, it's a talk of the town, talk of the country. Hey, become a rock Mr. Charlie, rock Miss Monty, talk of the country. So ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Oh, hey, just ring the alarm. I want to see you all dancing, Lord God no. And if you're happy and you love me, you tell me go on. You're happy and you love me, you tell me go on. If you're happy and you love me, come tell me go on. Happy and you love me, just tell me go on. Ring the alarm, the tennis on ya. And I love you, so you better ring the alarm. Lord God no, ring the alarm. Hey, four big sound in a one big line. The dance sound I play the other three keep calm. Four big sound in a one big line. The boom sound I play the other three keep calm. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Oh, another sound is dying. Let me say yeah, yeah, reggae, reggae. Remember this sound, it's the talk of the town, talk of the country. Rock Mr. Charlie, rock Miss Monty, talk of the country. Sing along, ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Oh, hey, ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Watch the sound when I timber, watch the sound when I play, watch the sound when I timber, watch the sound when I play. Just ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Lord, yeah, that whoa. Ring the alarm, Lord, no, because another sound died. Another sound died.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Fiction. My name is Melanie McNair. I am the Senior Director of Public Programming here and have been named the fourth M, which is the biggest honor of my life, in this Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival. It's Festival 5. It's also the 5th season that we're doing events in this building, so we're growing up together. And it's always a pleasure to host the brilliant, creative, and soulful, and far-reaching, and how many other words can I come up with? Caribbean writers. These are some of my favorite events of the year. So it's my pleasure to welcome you here, and I'll do the unsexy kind of housekeeping announcements, which is to let you know that there's a bathroom against this back wall if you need to go, and to also let you know that drinks and food from the cafe is fine in here. So if you find yourself getting thirsty, help yourself and come on back. And it's my great joy to introduce you to M1, Marcia Messiah.
Hello, good people. Good afternoon. Welcome to Festival 5. This is our day 2, and the event that we're here to enjoy is entitled Man Doh Cry. I am the festival founder. I'm just the BCLF's mama, but I have 2 midwives, the other 2 M's. And we have a crazy story. We actually all went to school together at the same high school. One of them has been my best friend since I was 12 years old, and then the other one was just somebody we really looked up to while we were at school. So it's a crazy, amazing journey that we get to do this thing. So Man Doh Cry. So what we try to do a little bit is kind of democratize the way we tell our stories and make stories very reflective of the Caribbean experience, which is sound and sight and image. And I hope that we accomplish that, and I hope you feel all the love that we've poured into this. This afternoon's event is a literary exploration of norms, dynamics, relationships, and rites of passage of Caribbean masculinity through the selected works of 3 of my favorite award-winning male writers resident in different outposts of the Caribbean civilization and settlement. Andre Bagu is leading them in conversation, and this event is expected much in the manner of the letters of these writers to confront social assumptions about race, masculinity, sexuality, and how immigrant communities concurrently reinforce and rebuff ideas of heritage and aspirations of social mobility. This conversation is also expected to provide a rich opportunity to observe the prismatic nature of Caribbean masculinity. Some of them live in the US, and some of them live in Trinidad, in the Caribbean. And it's as if they are the twin selves of the Caribbean masculine identity. Jonathan is a second generation immigrant. Andre lives in Trinidad, and Roland and Kevin live also in Jamaica and Trinidad, respectively. Our conversation partner, or the host for this event, is Andre Bagu, who is a writer, essayist, and poet from Trinidad and Tobago. And without further ado, because y'all not really here to see me, I'm going to invite Andre and the rest of my literary friends on stage.
Hello, and welcome to Man Doh Cry. As was mentioned, I am Andre Bagu, and I will be the moderator for this panel. I would like to begin by thanking the BCLF team for inviting me to moderate this panel, and indeed for coming up with the wonderful idea of merging these 3 amazing authors into this very interesting and I'm sure thought-provoking concept to discuss. So the writers before you are very different. They come from different spaces. They have written very different books. And yet, each and every one of those books deals with family, Each deals with intersectionality. Each touches upon the enduring impact, notwithstanding so much progress and the breakdown of so many binaries, of gender roles in shaping our experiences. And specifically, they all involve and implicate notions of masculinity. Jonathan Escoffery's If I Survive You follows the fate of an American family that has ties to Jamaica. At one point, however, the mother figure in this family resiles and returns to Jamaica. When she is asked at a crucial moment why she takes this decision to make this reverse journey, she says, "Look how long we spent taking care of man, your father, your boys. Who has ever taken care of me?" And I think with this very succinct brushstroke, Jonathan, who I'm so excited to hear from tonight, has given us a really powerful portrait of the pigeonhole into which this mother has been placed, and by implication, the overbearingness of the space held by the men in her family. But if it is an overbearingly male space, it is also a perilous one for sons and fathers, a space perhaps presided over by the spirit of the biblical story of Isaac, merged with the bloodletting of Cain and Abel. The disappearance of the patriarch, the literal landowner, Dalton Changor, looms over the haunted text of Hungry Ghost by Kevin Jared Hussein. Yet absence is a kind of presence, and this mysterious landowner is revealed through the setting and through the systems and the people he has departed from, particularly his wife Molly. The roles expected of her as a woman and the disjunction between those expectations and the reality of her own self and her radical sense of reinvention, as well as the double standards that apply to men versus women, all inform her fate in this book and throw into relief perhaps the hegemony of male power, a power that sits alongside male vulnerability in this novel. A father figure also disappears in Roland Watson Grant's novel Sketcher. Towards the end of this novel, which is set in the swampland of Louisiana and also follows a family's migration, we come upon the following passage voiced by the book's male protagonist who has been searching. Dead alligators were on their backs in the mud. They were swollen and looked like cylinders you could roll around. I was halfway through looking for my father's bones out there in the pond before I realized that I had been doing that for weeks. As the water level fell, I'd climb into the tamarind tree, looking into the pond for the bones or clothes, relieved to see nothing but the rusty tin roof toasted by time. In the smoke now, on the surface of the dark water, orange and blue flames appeared and vanished like mischievous spirits. This was hell. Missing fathers, murderous fathers, murdered men, hateful brothers, disappointed buddies, friends. If bad man don't cry, it is nonetheless true that they suffer and inflict suffering to a degree that is in sharp contrast to their apparent stoicism. Encountering that passage that I just read felt like encountering the key to reading this novel, the key to just understanding its many complex undertows. Anyhow, so let me let you hear for yourself. Now that essay is out of my system. I'm going to introduce each reader, and they will read for about 8 minutes from their books. And then after we go through that whole process, we'll sit and chat and have a discussion. And then towards the end, there will be about 15 minutes of questions from the audience. So plan your questions from now. So the first reader is Jonathan Escoffery. Jonathan Escoffery received his MFA from the University of Minnesota is a fellow of the University of Southern California's PhD in Creative Writing and Literature program, and in 2021 was awarded a Wallace Stegner Fellowship from the Creative Writing program at Stanford University. He was raised in Miami, Florida. If I Survive You is his first long-form work of fiction, and it is long-listed for the Booker Prize, so congratulations. And also congratulations on your, oh, woo! Yes, enthusiasm from the audience. And also congratulations because it's the book birthday as well, because this has been exactly 1 year since that came out. And speaking of birthdays, Kevin Jared Hossein is the winner of the 2018 Commonwealth Short Story Prize and the author of 3 books published in the Caribbean, including The Repenters, which was shortlisted for the OCM Bocas Prize and longlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award. He lives in Trinidad and Tobago. His birthday was 2 days ago, and he did not get a chance to celebrate because he was on a flight to come to this festival. So everyone, please wish him happy birthday. Roland Watson, too, yeah. It's the harmonization at the end that I just got. Roland Watson Grant was born in Kingston, Jamaica. A former teacher of English, he studied literature at the University of the West Indies. He now works in advertising as a creative director, and he was the Caribbean winner of the 2021 Commonwealth Short Story Prize, and I think we might hear a little piece from that story. Sketcher is his first novel, and the second is Skid, and I believe it's intended to be part of a trilogy, but maybe you'll tell us more about that. But yes, without further ado, Jonathan Escoffrey.
Thank you, Andre, for that wonderful introduction. You also kind of kept us on our toes because you're moving like in and out of our introductions there in a very smooth, very seamless kind of way. So I'm gonna read something. It's from the book, but it's kind of a cobbled together excerpt. So it's not. This doesn't appear exactly as I'm gonna read it in the book. So it's an exclusive, you could say. And it's a little spicy, so I hope I hope you don't offend too easy. The first time, you simply watch. You drive your '87 Dodge Raider up Old Cutler Road to a high-rise that overlooks the Miami River. Though you were searching for English tutoring jobs, the Craigslist ad you found buried in calls for 18-plus nude girl models, the one you are responding to now, read, "Watch my boyfriend and I in bed." Perhaps you'd have given the ad no further thought, but your rent's already past due. Plus, the call seems to have been tailored specifically for you. Preferably 6'2" or taller. Preferably 200 plus pounds. Preferably black. You sign in with security, printing your name legibly, and write "of Cutler Ridge" behind it, like there's another Trelawney zipping around this city, making poor life choices. The guard phones up for approval before pressing a button that opens a frosted glass barrier to the elevators. On the lift up, you remind yourself that this is asinine, and that in Miami, great city of cons, you're as likely to wind up getting your organs harvested as you are to make rent meeting people from the internet at night. You assure yourself that they prefer black guys because when one goes missing, no one bothers to look for him. The elevator opens on the 42nd floor. Ceiling-high mirrors dispersed throughout the hall separate the unit's entryways, presenting you with startling clarity. You pause to view yourself before entering Unit 4203. Fitted black slacks and white button down, black tie. You're less recognizable as a voyeur and might instead be mistaken for a waiter just off a shift at Olive Garden. As long as you're not mistaken for a burglar, you've done well. Still, you wonder, as you had earlier, rifling through your closet, what is the appropriate dress for watching others fuck? You recall your older brother appearing unexpectedly on your doorstep one evening during your first year in high school. He cupped his girlfriend's hands in his, and the pair exuded springtime love. Delano explained that they'd been in the area and that he hadn't seen his little brother in too long. So the three of you decided you'd watch a movie together in your bedroom. And while you faced the television from the floor, back leaned against your bed, they began to fuck gently behind you. His girlfriend breathed soft moans into your ear as he pumped into her, the mattress throbbing against your back. It was the smell that shocked you most, the smell of spread open humans. You wonder even now if they had wanted you to see, if that had been the entire point. But you were too afraid to turn around before the movie ended. What did you wear then? And one summer in college, your girlfriend Caitlin flew you out to Amsterdam, where you discovered yourselves too sheepish to enter a sex show in the red light district. 70 euros, she'd groaned. Just to watch? It can't be worth it. You agreed, but you also wondered if worth it was the point. As you strolled the cobblestone streets, you discussed sharing one of the women perched in the entryways to their brothelettes. What did you wear then? Something dignified? The two of you speculated about the price these women charged, and if they'd speak enough English for you to negotiate. Would it cost double if you both took part? What if Caitlin only watched? The whole thing seemed overly complicated, you agreed, as though you'd expected they'd wear price tags around their necks. Truthfully, how were you to negotiate anything when walking past, you couldn't even meet these women's eyes? Afterward, you decided you'd learn something about yourself in Amsterdam. It had little to do with morality, you knew. It had everything to do with a lack of courage. Just several weeks before your trip, Caitlin's closest friend offered you a ride home from campus, and at a red light in rush hour traffic, she unzipped your jeans and groped your dick into erectness. You asked her, "What the fuck are you doing?" And she'd responded, "Like you don't want it." You didn't, or at least you hadn't, not before it was already happening. "Men don't turn down free head," she said, as though challenging you to prove otherwise. You did not. She shifted into park and said, "Just tell me when the light turns green." You wore a black cardigan, you recall. You enter Morgan and Tim's condo without knocking, exactly as arranged. In the bedroom, you find them illuminated by a cut of Miami skyline. They've already begun, basic enough. You figure they timed it to begin when security called up. Morgan sits at the bed's edge, her elbows propping her torso. Tim's head eclipses Morgan's pelvis. His naked back twists so that his face presses into her. The light from across the river soaks Tim's muscular back and ass. As promised by their ad, their silhouettes are attractive, conventionally. And should they look up from their work to see you inching toward the bar cart pressed near the doors that led out onto the balcony, they'll see you meet their specifications. You avert your eyes, though they are paying you to watch. And although they'll want to know you are present, you step furtively toward the bar cart. As the darkness thins, you see an envelope with your name written in marker, leaning against the bottle of Patron. You pocket it, thinking how strange it is that someone who has been broke his entire life can recognize the weight of cash. You pour, then shoot a mouthful of tequila before Morgan's murmurs bring you back to her. She grips Tim's head with both hands, stifling him with her crotch. He emits breathless gurgles. You try but fail to make out what Morgan is saying, other than you. The rhythm of her murmur suggests it's the same words over and again. You 1, 2. You 1, 2, 3, 4. You 1, 2. You 1, 2, 3, 4. Tim's fingers are working vigorously just below his chin. Morgan comes, or Morgan approximates the signs of orgasm. Her body spasms tenderly as she takes Tim's hand, then collapses into silence. Tim keels backward, panting as though having emerged from the depths of the Atlantic. You tilt back as much tequila as you can without choking. Should Tim or Morgan turn to acknowledge your presence, you are entirely too lucid to respond. Morgan stirs and crawls over the mattress to the bedside table. This triggers Tim, who lifts himself onto his knees. He faces the skyline, his profile facing you. Morgan approaches from behind and slips something down around Tim's neck, a necktie, you think. Tim takes his semi-hard dick in his hand, and Morgan tightens the tie so the knot squeezes, sending Tim's arm into overdrive. He strokes himself furiously, and Morgan digs her knee between his shoulder blades, tugging. Tim leans into the strangulation. Morgan heaves in the opposite direction. She starts into her rhythm. You 1, 2. You 1, 2, 3, 4. You tilt your ear, fighting to distinguish her words, but it's unnecessary now as Morgan raises her voice, first from a whisper, then to a shout. You little man, she says. You little worthless white man.
Andrea, celebrate my birthday in Brooklyn, eh? I'll celebrate again when I go back home. Thank you, everybody. So just a bit of preamble here before I read. I'm actually going to read two shorter parts. So the novel Hungry Ghost follows mainly two threads and is basically two social strata. There's a huge estate atop a hill that's owned by Marley and Dalton Changor, and down below there's a barrack that is occupied by 5 families, and the family that we follow is called the Sarups, and they live in squalor basically. And at the beginning of the novel, Dalton Changor goes missing, and he just leaves this note that, tell my mother I love her, please untie the dog, and he just vanishes after that. So we follow at the beginning of the book the person I'm about to read in this excerpt, Marley Changor, who is his very young wife. In the night, a loud racket came from downstairs. Even through the clatter of rain, she heard it clear, a continuous rapping. Someone or something banging at the front door. She gripped onto the balustrade that shouldered the staircase, heart racing as the banging persisted, then turned around and returned to the bedroom, making as little noise as possible, lifted her pillow, and rested her palm upon Dalton's gun. Vishnu, the German shepherd, had a tendency to bump his head into things at night. The dog was going blind, which made Marley a little nervous. She couldn't depend on the dog to sound any alarm if anyone were to come around. The damn dog was of no use to her bumbling about the porch and getting his head stuck between the wooden spindles. But this sound outside was too loud to be a dog. There was someone out there, something out there. At night, the lights of the estate called attention to itself, like the noctiluca of a secluded river. It all looked like something out of a dark fairy tale. Past a certain point on the grounds, there was a significant cleft between the light and the dark, a point where the dark opened up like a whale's mouth. Where Marley had come from, there was always something happening at night. The echoes of a drunkard stumbling into the street, the distant washing of the sea, the echoes of affronted dogs. Dalton always had records playing at night. He never snapped his fingers, never danced to any of the music. Marley supposed he kept the music on for greater reasons than enjoyment. It made the house feel more populated than it really was. Perhaps, she thought, he was also aware of how isolated they were in their mansion. When the music came off, the silence that followed was jarring and immediate. there would be toads and the crickets and the cicadas and the tuck, 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 tuck of all the lizards. All a reminder of how far they were from civilization, how far they were from another human soul. Marley peered out of the upstairs window. Through the blanket of rain, the porch where he usually parked his pickup was still in view, still empty. She sat at her vanity, the banging downstairs getting louder and louder. The mirror showed a haggard face, eyes sunken, jaws heavy with worry. She combed her hair to calm herself. Then the banging stopped. But there was something else now, a light creaking. Even through the rain, she heard it. The brush fell from her hand, and the fear rose up, clutched her throat. She paced downstairs, her husband's gun in her hand. Nearly jumped out of her skin when she saw it. The door was open, wavering slightly, as if it had just been tampered with. Had it been open this whole time? Had she forgotten it? The sound of the banging, was it the wind rattling against its frame? Sometimes only a modicum of force can evaluate the difference between open and close, in and out, life and death. Marley kept a cat stare at it for a full minute until she was suddenly reminded of the gothic allure of the night. The crickets in tandem with the toads, the stars and the clouds and the rain and the moon, and all the secrets hidden in the darkness that the northern range overlooked, all seeming in harmony with itself. But step outside of all of it and the wolves would be waiting. She crept towards the door, each step feeling like the ground could give way, like the very foundation that she stood on could betray her at any second. Even if that happened, she thought she had to keep going forward. When she got to the porch, her heart jumped. There was a figure in a corner. But it was the dog, Vishnu, his big panting mouth curved into a silly smile. The loud wind swept the rain onto the porch, and just as Marley half turned to the door, she noticed something on the white rattan mini table. It was a shoebox. She took it inside and locked the door, set it on the table, hesitating to open it, poured herself a glass of cherry brandy, downed it in one gulp. She opened the box and the blood rushed from her head. She went pale, nearly fainted when she saw it. Inside was a dead rat, freshly killed, a dark depression on the side of his abdomen where it was struck, mouth open like it had just released its final squeak. Below, a note. She gagged, pinched the end of the paper with trembling fingers, and in capital letters and childish scrawl wrote, $3,000, Monday, 4 a.m., the number 4 bridge. Tell and you die. We are watching you. The same betokening of horror came upon Marley then. That deep promise of pessimism. She had to reread the note 3 or 4 times before the words could have any semblance of sense. And even when she could put them together, it took her a full minute to accept that this note was real. And when the questions came, she had to sit, her eyes flicking between the note and the dead rat. It was a warning of a coming plague, and she was shaking with strangely the fear had seemed so distant at the time. She now knew that whatever it was she thought it was coming. It was already here. It was at the doorstep. Now she had to stare it in the eye. Now, was the note meant for her, or was it meant for Dalton? Was it a ransom note? Does this mean Dalton had been kidnapped? Were they really watching? Where were they watching from? Was her husband dead? Was he alive? Was the money in exchange for his release? In exchange for her life? Would they leave her alone once they got the money? And most of all, what would happen if she just didn't care to pay? So throughout the story, Marley doesn't want to pay the ransom. She wants her husband to stay gone. And this results in catastrophic circumstances for many people around her. So this is a part that's slightly after this. The clock struck midnight, bringing in Monday. In 4 hours, Marley was supposed to have $3,000 delivered to the number 4 bridge. And if Dalton really were being held for ransom, she was his last hope. It would be all up to her. She didn't have any plans to deliver the money. Being Dalton's last hope was as far as she is willing to go. He never asked her to be anything more than that when he married her. He wanted her to be the ballerina in the music box, but the tune was almost over. There was still 4 hours left. Then he'd be gone. He'd be finally gone. And then only then could she tell the police the truth. Only then could she report it. She wondered how many gleefully smoking wives stood over their husbands, watching them wrestle their own bodies and die of heart attacks. How many wives saw their husbands choking at the dinner table only to continue eating their meals like nothing was happening, just pleased that God was listening for once in his life. Marley needed a drink. Dalton had an inspired collection of liquors, all in a row like praying monks inside the temple of the mahogany cabinet. Bottles of Four Roses whiskey, Carta de Oro, Doors cherry brandy, Fernet Branca, El Dorado, among other things. It gave him the appearance of a connoisseur, one who could taste history in a drop of spirit, the fields of sugarcane, the rivers, and the herons that waded in them, who could wax poetic of all the souls who labored to get that rum there. But that wasn't the reality. Dalton drank them all just the same. He didn't care for taste or flavor notes or viscosity. If it came in a pretty bottle and got him drunk, he bought it. Marley took a bottle of Demerara white rum from the cabinet and poured herself a glass, drank the whole thing to ease her nerves, then decided to take the whole bottle with her to the study. The study had been reassembled to accommodate the village children Dalton had been inviting to their home, sitting cushions all over the floor, toy chests in a corner like a scolded child. Marley had spent most of her first year of marriage in this room, devoured dozens of his books there, feeling a whiff of sadness with each one she completed, knowing she could never discuss them with anyone. Dalton had read almost none of the books he owned. The room brought only anger to her now. This entire room was a ruse fashioned from psychosis. And during that first year of marriage, she had deconstructed her entire self with the revered language of dead writers, dead British writers. Patched herself with ideas and metaphors until she wasn't sure where her former self died and the new self was born. Her mind its own ship of Theseus. She often read aloud to train her voice, taking laborious care to commit each new word to memory. So many people in the county spoke like they had mouthfuls of marbles, or with such weakness that the wind could destroy their words. At the time, she understood why Dalton wanted her manner of speaking to be unfaltering and as elegant as the British text in these books. But just as this room, she herself was a ruse, fashioned from psychosis, she realized. Dalton was not a social creature. He kept himself disconnecting from anything else. Never mingled unless he had something to gain from it. He had no real friends, no one who would come looking for him. Never learned how to play any card games. When he drank, he never did with company, not even with her. He owned books for the sake of their jackets. He owned art that he neither admired nor analyzed. Even this marriage, he wasn't sure. She wasn't sure he enjoyed. He took orders and counsel from inanimate objects for Christ's sake, and then those orders were passed on to her. The more she thought she knew, the less she realized she did. Sometimes she imagined he was hosting some speakeasy beneath a hidden door in the floor of this mansion. Or maybe there really was nothing behind his large vacant eyes. Nothing at all. Did he even know who he was? He had no family, no children, siblings, cousins. She closed the door of the study and started dancing, began slow, twisted her body to the brass melody, put one foot before the other, careful not to entangle her stride. At the end of the song, she collapsed to the ground, in insane laughter, the merry-go-round of the world still spinning alongside her. She remained there for the rest of the early morn, long after the clock had struck 4. Time had run out for Dalton. And if the people who came to get him were to come to kill her now, her ghost would still be dancing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's Clevis, isn't it? I had a birthday in September too, but I didn't take a plane on that day, so I'll take a piece of his song. In the 1970s, late 1970s, in Jamaica, the pro communist or pro socialist government aligned with Cuba at the time, much to the distress of the greater powers in the north, announced that if you want to leave Jamaica at this very axial time, then what you can do is remember that there are 5 flights a day. You can leave. Valerie Beaumont, who is the second most important character in Sketcher, my first novel, was perhaps one of those people who left, but not to be parallel with the luck of other people who perhaps found themselves in major cities making money. She found herself married to a dreamer who thought that New Orleans would spread into the swamp and that he would find oil on the land which he bought. But there's a thing called subsidence that sucks everything down, including land, including dreams. Skid Beaumont, the main character, found himself having to relearn how to be a man, having to relearn what it meant to be Caribbean, growing up in the second generation Caribbean, growing up in the United States and in a swamp. And one of the ways he thought that it was important to be a man was to make money. And so this passage speaks to a ruse that he did trying to be that person. He wrote a poem on his father's birthday. And he said, Alric Beaumont is a brilliant man. He can fix anything and he can shock dead radios back to life, resurrect old stoves gone cold. He makes sleeping TV sets open their eyes and assembles rockets that go high up on the shelf of heaven, blazing bright above our level. Then he tells you the real deal. Okay, I know it sounds kind of artsy-fartsy and real pretentious, but that year my father was paying me $10 to write that crap about him. And since old Skid didn't get much for his birthday, I needed the money. You see, on your birthday, you get a good breakfast, lunch money, dinner, just like other days. If it was on a weekend, then moms would probably bake cornbread. But generally, she gave you a kiss and prayed for you, pops slapped you on the back and told your brothers to grab you by the arms and legs and bounce your butt on a rock 10 times for good luck and then toss your ass in the bayou. That was it. Happy birthday till next year, you hear? So when this poem thing came about 3 days after I hit the big 1-0, I sat down in an old car seat beside the house facing the bayou, and I tried to write something. Now, that car seat is real comfy, because over there, it's just an old bed spring leaned up against a house that's covered with some herb vines that my mother calls cerasy in her Caribbean accent. She says it's a good thing to drink for purging the blood. Well, all I know is that car seat and the bed spring covered with cerasy vine both make a nice shady spot for falling asleep. So every time I tried writing it, I just drifted off into Pop's vision. So after that, I got Doug and Tony to help me write it, but I didn't tell them about the $10 price. Doug came up with that blue shelf part I told you about. Now, I don't know exactly why Pops needed me to do this, but I think it had something to do with him and Moms. They're always quarreling. But hell, adults are always weird that way. So I kept my mind on the prize money and I wrote proper English like I learned in school and like my mom's taught me. I really wanted to start writing all my poetic stuff in a journal, but you ain't got no privacy with 3 brothers and 1 room. Anyway, the first line of the poem gave my father goose pimples. I swear the man teared up and I got my $10 and went straight to buy cold drinks and dried plums and a sketchbook for Frico just in case he needed it. I stashed everything else in the tamarind tree by securing it with copper wires from inside an old standing fan. Then I banked the other $6 in that empty propane canister behind the dresser. Apart from the money, I was proud of myself because I had beaten old Frico at something. You see, Pops asked my brother first to write a composition about his father. He told him he'd get the $10 and everything, but old Frico, he just couldn't help himself. He had to tell the truth. He wrote something about Pops not knowing how to love and care for a woman and how women need to be cared for, especially the mother of his children and all that. Well, look, I agreed with the guy 100%, but that wouldn't get me any money. So I sat down, gathered my big brothers around me, took out my dictionary, and wrote Mr. Alaric Beaumont a poem. Not just a composition, a poem. Ooh, you should have seen that money coming out the wallet. He wanted to give me one old big boring $10 note just like that. But I told him I needed 10 $1 bills so I could throw them up in the air and count them over and over. And for his honesty, my brother got squat. Of course, Valerie Bowman found out about the whole poetry sweepstakes thing, and she silently raised hell. It was one of those whispering arguments done inside when we were kids, out in the yard playing soccer penalty shootouts. Pa Campbell had just come over to help Pops raise the porch again. We had to do this every year or so because of the subsidence in the swamp, and the porch, which was on the softer side, closer to the water, always sank faster. Pops used to say if I shut up long enough, I could hear the house sinking. Anyway, they dumped a load of marl and gravel and took apart the porch, and while Pa was busy hammering, Mom and Pops used the noise for cover. I don't know what the big deal is, Valerie. Oh, you mean apart from teaching your children to gamble and using money we don't have? Gamble? Yes, gamble and bribery, trying to buy their loyalties to prove you're special. What's really bothering you, Valerie? Do you know why we're here? We're here, Alaric, because I always believed in you. I looked into the sky at night and I know that the man I married helped put rockets all the way up there. Her voice went softer, so I had to press my ear up against the frosted glass louver. It was cold. Alaric, he can do anything, but one thing he can't do is take us out of this swamp. Is that what's bothering you? What's bothering me is that your children are losing the father they know, that we're poor, and that we've been here too long. Here we go again. Alaric, you see that old PVC pipe out in the yard? The one that leads from the tank? That plastic pipe is a symbol for me. Jeez. It's above ground, Alaric. Above ground. And do you remember why? Because when we just got here, you said, let's not even bury that pipe because it's only temporary. All temporary. Soon the city will be sweeping through here and we'll be in a better place. Now, congratulations on finishing the well, but Alaric, the pipe is still there, above ground. Look, Val, no, you look. Look around you, Alaric. I'm still here. We're still here, taking it lying down just like that plastic pipe. The city is afraid of these backwaters. And meanwhile, you think it's okay to give your children money to feed your vanity? And then Pa Campbell, he hammered up a storm. And I was happy because I didn't want to hear anymore. I went up into the tree for a cold drink and looked off into the city. And by the following year, we started going to church more and spending more time as a family, as my mother put it. On weekdays when she got home from cooking and waiting tables, she would help us with our homework by herself. And then before dinner, we'd light a small fire outside behind the house and put some wild bushes on it to help chase the mosquitoes and the gnats away, because especially when it rained and you heard those sad old cypress trees weeping into the water, you knew the bugs were coming. They were coming out to feed. Then after dark, the crickets took over and worked the night shift, thousands of them chirping all night to the beat of one raindrop at a time, sliding off a leaf into the swamp water, or drumming into one of my mother's cooking pots through the tin roof. That's how you passed the time when it rained in the swamp, counting drops and cursing the crickets. Then all you needed was Pa Campbell wailing the blues on his harmonica for you to feel like you could just go lay down in the bayou and blow bubbles like a bullfrog just so you couldn't hear all that sadness. But when it was dry, we'd all make a makeshift bench at the back of the house and watch the sunset. Calvin would be close by, scratching himself or running from his kids. That's his dog. And I'd look at the edges of the sky change from blue to blush and listen to the critters and wonder why God spent so much time decorating a day that was dying. One time, my mother said those clouds were lemon custards and the edges toasted golden and the westbound birds were like sprinkles. And those frogs going glug, glug, glug were probably singing their little ones to sleep. So I thought, wow, that's really nice. Then right after that, my father came home, smack in the middle of the creme brulee clouds and the lullaby singing. He'd been away for 2 nights and smelt different and sounded tipsy. There was a big peace sign painted on his forehead, and he had these new fancy clothes on. And I just went right back to thinking that God was wasting his time decorating a day that was just about dead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those incredible readings. And, in that passage that we just heard, with the rain falling whilst bad men do cry, certainly the pathetic fallacy of that passage reminds us of how powerfully language can embody the emotions of the characters in a work of literature. I thought I would begin the conversation with a confession of sorts. So I'm from Trinidad, from Belmont. And wait a minute, hey, hi, wow. And, I'm the only boy in a family of 3 girls. And growing up in primary school, I had absolutely no interest in kicking a ball. I remember one day, it was the sports, but they had sports or games or whatever they called them, PE, whatever that was. And they were playing cricket. And they gave me this piece of wood, and I was like, what do I do with this? That's how little I cared about cricket. And then I went to St. Mary's College, CIC. So those of you who know that, the Trinidadians will know I'm messed up. And there I fell in love with literature. I decided to do literature in my studies. But strangely, within St. Mary's, and I really want to hear what the culture is like where all of you all are from, the idea of a boy doing literature was like, no, that's for the girls, that's for the convent next door, And so there was this weird sort of feeling of, I'm not quite fitting into these tropes. And this was ironic, of course, because, as all of us in this room knows, the publishing industry certainly has been dominated by a certain type of male, white, normally a toxic masculine sort of figure, the Hemingways or the various famous authors who may or may not have killed their wives, and it's a little footnote in the bio. And so there was all of this rich, weird, strange contradiction happening. And when I decided, okay, I'm going to be interested in this literature thing and writing, I felt I was pushing back against that. And I was just wondering, from all of you all, when you all decided in your own journeys to become writers, what was the reaction like? And did you also have to grapple with this gendered sense?
We could go in order, right? We can go in order, yeah. I think something I heard, and maybe a lot of us heard, as if you were a person who always wanted to be a writer, I was told by my parents, I was told by my mother that if you're going to be a writer, then you had better be a best-selling author, and that's the only way to do it.
Good advice.
And little did she know that's really not even I'm technically a best-selling author, but that's not like necessarily paying the rent. You know what I mean? There's and that's a whole other different discussion. I think, I'm pretty sure my father's response, if insofar as he was paying attention to that kind of proclamation that I made as a kid, would just be like, just I'm not. I feel like I don't have enough moisture in my mouth to quite pull it off right now. But it definitely wasn't. It wasn't supportive, but that's a household thing that you can grow up and you can be resentful and all this thing, but looking in the wider culture, that could be expanded and expanded and expanded. Looking around it in a place like Miami, which is where I grew up, which is this, it's very much a city of immigrants with a confluence of all these different cultures. But the kind of average sense was that if you are even a reader, that you must be kind of stupid and must be kind of wasting your time, and that was very disheartening. But I think growing up, once I got to the age where I was choosing my own classes and going to college and being in my literature classes and then college workshops, I agree I mean, it's not really it's not an opinion question. So it's just the fact that historically, traditionally, it's that white male voice that has dominated. But these classes were still 80% women in this class, and so there was this, and I think the trajectory of who again has traditionally and is still a problem now, like who might get the attention where you get the big book deal and all of that. It is changing now, of course, but I think it's still not very. It wasn't common when I was in school to have any kind of support where you say I'm even going to be an English major, or whatever you're going to do with that job, or I'm going to be maybe teach literature. That all of that was seen as not very masculine pursuits, and yeah, and I could say a lot more about that, I think, but I'm coming from again, a city of immigrants who, because always have to, there's like kind of emotional impact of not appreciating how people approach what you love and what you value. But then I also have to look at what a lot of these people and communities had to go through in order to survive and make it in make that trip, that crossing that boundary, that threshold, to make it in, to pack up their lives for various reasons, to make that decision even to pack up their lives and their families and come to the U.S. And then think about what kind of jobs actually fed their children. It's like I can be critical of my dad saying that's not that's not a job, that's not and I obviously I know a lot more about how to make it work and sustain myself, but for much of my life he was very much right, and I did struggle, and I was very poor for most of my life, trying to pursue a life in arts. And it shows in my writing.
I mean, yes, certainly there's that economic intersectionality to this issue. I mean, Kevin, what was it like for you?
Well, we both from Trinidad, and your school was still good enough to offer.
It's like two different countries.
To offer literature as a subject, because it wasn't offered in mine. So I'm from Central Trinidad, which could seem like a different country to North Trinidad. And so when I went to school, in secondary school, literature wasn't a subject in the school. If you wanted to study literature, you had to befriend some people from the sister schools, some girls there, borrow their books.
This was an all-boys school?
It was an all-boys school, I should note, right? So it was an all-boys school, and yours was an all-boys school too. Yeah.
Yes.
And so when it came down to I'm just gonna digress here a little bit to Caribbean masculinity. A lot of it, and I think masculinity on you, a lot of it is utilitarian, which is you only do things that are useful. And, literature is seen, is useful, it's seen very low down in the food chain. And it seems like, okay, when it comes to masculinity, Caribbean masculinity, in most societies, it really boils down, and this is what passes down from grandfather to father to son and so on, to 3 P's basically: get women pregnant, provide for them, and protect them.
Those were not the P's I was thinking about. For a second I was concerned about where this was going.
And we know that is a very old-fashioned way of thinking, but it's something that still pervades Caribbean households, and something that I've seen in the ones surrounding me. And not so much mine. Mine was more like, you're not gonna have any money, so you're not gonna get a girlfriend, so you're not gonna, Yeah, so I guess the same thing with Jonathan. And then I think I was relating to some things Jonathan was saying. As a city of immigrants, in Trinidad is a country of people who weren't necessarily supposed to be there. They were brought here by persuasion or force, indentureship, and something like that I've heard uttered in my family and my friends' families is that they come all the way from India, they come all the way across the dark ocean for you to just want to be a writer, you know. so much years ago. And so, and actually when I got my start with my actual formal introduction to literature was with Elizabeth Nunes, who is one of the founders of the BCLF. She came to Trinidad and I was 19 years old and she did a workshop in the University of Trinidad and Tobago. My father signed me up for it against my will. And because he saw that I really liked to write and it finally had something, because Trinidad is was a wasteland back then when it came to literature. And I was only one of two boys in the class. The other was like a 40-something-year-old man, and everyone else were women. And I think they forgot I was a boy, so I would have to bad talk men with them, all the time. But it came down to that. And even in school, when I was just doing English classes, even the teachers were female who taught English, and even they thought it was female, the subject, because they'd be like, boys, you need to get in touch with your feminine side to the subject. So there was this pervasive thing that doing this is not masculine at all.
Yeah. And it's like what Professor Nunes said last night on this stage. We do it to ourselves. We perpetuate these tropes, both sides. All sides. Roland, what was it like in Jamaica?
Well, I think the background to that should be that I think we all know that Rastafari says I and I. That sense of identity. I think in a more urban kind of way, Jamaican men speak of themselves in the third person. Yo, bad man, I eat that. Yeah, talk to bad man, right? So I think it's fitting, very appropriate. And that is the background to the fact that there's a kind of duality. There's always been a kind of duality. Because some of the baddest man they're so bad, but they're bad and they're crying at the same time, but they're doing the most violent things to hide the tears, or that you can guarantee that stones will fall with the tears. Yeah. So I remember the first time, and you're asking about my start, and I remember being in third form, just discovered Olive Senior and James Joyce and saying, wow, I can do this. And then the first time we did a playing class, I think I was Antonio's lawyer in The Merchant of Venice. I was supposed to defend Antonio, against Shylock. And let's say why it is that you can't have a pound of flesh, And I remember scribbling on the paper because I wasn't ready. And I hope my teacher never sees this. She's on my Facebook page. I scribbled on a piece of paper really quickly, may have been a napkin or something, what my defense was going to be because I hadn't prepared. And I went up there and I, did the whole thing and I defended him and so and so. And when that was done, the class was cheering and it was a standing ovation, etc. But you can immediately move from that classroom. You see, that kind of wonderful Olympics with the language doesn't help you in the lunch line when some guy cut in front of you. As a matter of fact, if you use your defense of Antonia's voice in the lunch line, you probably get pushed on some more, right? They push you out the line. And there's that dichotomy. And the dichotomy is, I can respect you for your ability to weave these words and do this kind of performance. But somehow if you don't code switch or mode switch, see Marsha, I did it. Code switch or mode switch, you're in trouble. And that is a duality with masculinity. I don't like the term, but somebody wrote about the effeminization, I believe, of English in Jamaica some years ago. I don't like the term. I understand the idea. And it was that if you speak properly, if your subject and verb agrees, what? Even if you know better, No, well, not better. Even if you know the other one,
Was this
don't
in
do
school or just generally?
Well, in school especially, because that's where you were exposed to both, and that's where you had persons who there you had persons of the colonial persuasion who told you speak so badly. So it's funny that you have that authority figure saying you speak so badly, learn to speak English, but that you also have your peers saying if you speak like that, I get it. And I'm not going on the authority of the teacher. I'm going on the authority that you sound like a girl. Don't do it. That's basically some things are taught and some things are caught. And if the person that didn't teach you that, you catch it. Don't speak like that on the field, because you're not just going to get a salad with the ball. I'm probably floor you because you're this kind of you sound effeminate. Yeah, and it was interesting that even when you did that, even when you were able to code switch a bit, you still were seen as the English one. Maths is a man's subject.
And how did you
Technical
feel?
drawing is a man's subject.
How did that make you feel, having to do this code switching, navigating these different
So,
things?
so here's, and that's an interesting question. Thanks. One of the things was that I always felt like my mother was the one who set the culture. It was my mother who set the culture. She just said, well, you're not trying to please anybody with how you speak. What you're doing is you're being able to manage both of those languages. And she said, there are two languages. You're going to manage both of them. So she's the kind of person, my sister as well, my sister, my eldest sister, she also said, if you mix up, if you destroy the patois grammar as well, it's going to be a problem, because they're both languages, so don't mix that up either. But the toxic part comes when, if you speak like that, you're going to be in trouble. Okay, you're soft. Like literally how you speak says you're soft, which is always ridiculous to me. Yeah. So that was my experience with that. And you did find that as you went into, older, into sixth form, etc., that was alleviated a bit, but I think that it only changes form. I don't think it ends.
Yeah, and it seems as though there are a lot of confluences as well as intersections with economic imperatives as well. And it almost reminds me of yesterday afternoon's panel with Sharma Taylor and Camille and I think Soraya there, where there was this discussion of being othered, and if you're interested in writing, somehow you're other. I wanted to ask about specific things in your books as well. Let's go back in the other direction, Kevin. So the entire, the plot revolves around this disappearance of this male character, but yet, Marley, his wife, she feels literally his hand at her throat. An image that I think is so striking and so symbolic of really the stranglehold of the patriarchy on the feminine body. And I was wondering, how did Hungry Ghosts come about? And were you always intending to center everything around this central disappearance?
Yeah, the story started with the disappearance because there was a notion that I had in mind that when it comes to ownership of yourself, when it comes to your body, your behavior, your actions, there's actually one thing that you cannot really own about yourself, and that is your own reputation. You can't own other people's opinions. That's why so much powerful people fear cancellation, because it's so difficult to control other people's opinions. You have to do a massive amount of work to keep your reputation at stake. So with Dalton Chango, we never actually meet him. He's disappeared at the beginning of the book. And we only really know him through the thoughts of others and the dialogue of others. And basically through his reputation. And as we come to know more and more about him, we form an opinion of that. And that character is not there to actually change our minds about it. Now, there's another notion that I was thinking about, indentureship and the enslaved when they came to Trinidad. And they were, when Indian indentured laborers came to Trinidad, most of them lived in a barrack, which is many different families living in one building. Walls didn't go all the way to the top. There was no privacy or anything like that. And you would still have what you'd call toxic masculine behavior there, because every male in there wants to be the alpha. And then they go to a store, the person kicks them out, they go to an overseer in the cane field, they get hit, and they are in their own country, they are not the top. There's always something above them, and there's really no way to put and others are seeing them getting beaten, and they don't talk about it, they don't do anything about it. But what they do is that they go back and wreck the place, they go back and beat their wives, go back and beat their children, and all that's inherited is pain that's going down the line. And I wanted to write, the book opens with a boy named Krishna, who is the son of the parents Hans and Shweta, and he is actively wants to get out of that situation. So he's the only one who realizes that this is a cycle, this is a spiral that has been going down and down and down, and he's fighting hard to come against it.
And at last night's panel, which we all attended, the novelist Lauren Francis Sharma also questioned whether this Caribbean hesitance to be vulnerable has something to do with our colonial history, the history of slavery. And as you just mentioned, indentureship. I wonder if in your mind there is some sort of link between the way the male characters are acting in your book and that history. Is there something specific about that history that results in or plays a role in the shaping of their movements?
I think so, because as I said, the thing about masculinity is about setting the stage and is about control. And is basically, this is like the mother is the homemaker, but the father, in that role has to protect the home. But they are in a country that is constantly trying to destroy their homes. So now the father, the fathers of the men suddenly have no utilitarian use. The roles that they have to do, they cannot carry out. And as a result, they turn to, instead of construction, they turn to destruction. And it's strange I said it's passed down, because just small personal thing here. During the pandemic, I know we hate talking about the pandemic. During the pandemic, I was teaching virtually, but my classes got cut in half during the first year of the pandemic. So I was suddenly making less money than my wife. And for some reason, she has been making more money than me before, but we weren't married and we were living in the same house then. And then I had a kind of breakdown during that point, and she thought that was so bizarre, because she didn't see where that was coming from. And I really had to kind of look into myself as to why that was happening to me. It's because, my whole life, because literature wasn't my option, I had to go through all these different channels to even become a writer. And I had to be working in sciences, my entire life, to be earning at least this backdrop of money while I tried to get these books out. That suddenly, if I wasn't making enough money, I actually had a fear of being seen as useless. That's why I wouldn't just, if I had to be writing, I have to be working something else, because I had to constantly earn money. So we actually had to have that conversation that no, you do things around the house, you do all these things, not just about money and provision, and and it was strange, because I was that was something that knew that happened to me. And I think it was an amalgamation of just everybody telling me these things since I was a little boy, that you have to, bad things will happen if you don't do the provision, you don't do the protection. So, yeah.
And I certainly also think that this sense of our existence having to be completely instrumental and very functional or useful, as you say, it exists within a capitalist framework. And certainly it does tie back to that colonialism where our bodies were literally, we were chattels, literally. But Jonathan, you've talked in the past about the distinction in some of your stories between the husband as a loving husband versus the husband as provider. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. Is that something you see, at play in some of your writing? And do you think the longer you go, the more complicated the question? And do you think? Were you looking to kind of examine how arbitrary that distinction is, how difficult it is for some people to navigate between that.
I'm gonna stop before you, or start before you add to that. I think what I was kind of interested in is I was interested in this question of love, romantic love, the love of parents, love of love coming from the father towards the children. But I was also interested in examining romance in a sense, and holding that separate from love. Romance, it seems like there's a condition that has to come before romance, which is that you have to have a kind of financial security, and you have to, in a sense, if we're thinking about a traditional marriage, you have to be, in a sense, in that some kind of provider role, or in some kind of role where provision is that element is intact. And I mean, that's something I've been kind of I guess interested in. I believe you. I don't know. I've heard from family members, or the kind of household I grew up in. My mom has 8 sisters, and we would hear these stories about, we meaning my brother and I, about a certain man who was able to fly his fiancée around the world, and or maybe she lived in a different country, he'd be able to fly her out to visit in London or wherever. And isn't that so romantic? And there's a lot that has to come before being in that position to. I hope that's not
romance. Like, I feel like romance is not the word to describe your book. But I understand I get what you're saying.
Well, thinking of the relationships in the book, there's a part where and it's very brief in the middle of the book where Chelani meets a woman on the beach, and he's had a hard time, and he's been kicked out of his father's house, and he finally has found a full-time job, but he hasn't quite figured himself out, and he's living out of his vehicle, and he's entertaining this relationship, but there's a point where the woman realizes that he's living out of his car, and she sends him that. She writes that Dear John, I really like you, but I just can't date a homeless guy. There are certain things that have to be in place, and I don't think I'm exaggerating or going ridiculously. I think most people in the audience probably, that would be my guess if I were a wagering person, that there are certain, before you're going to be entertaining a certain kind of romantic relationship, you probably have to have a certain things in place. And so I don't know. I wanted to explore some of that, but then there's there are other ideas that the men, the boys who they grow into men and are struggling with, such as Delano, who's the older brother in this this family of 4, and he decides that he has to start his own business because he doesn't want to be in that position where a supervisor can humiliate him in front of anyone and nobody can call the shots. But the problem is that the business is successful for a while until the 2008 recession, and then the business starts going downhill, and he has a wife by this point, and he has 2 kids of his own, 2 boys, and she says, but couldn't you just get a job? And in his mind, the masculine thing to do, the manly thing to do, is to be his own boss. He doesn't want anyone over him. But that creates this problem because at that point he's not doing a good job of providing. And so I don't know. I was interested in these when these things are kind of come to a head, like these ideas that could be. And I'm not suggesting everyone holds those same ideas, but
no, but I mean, certainly another confession. When I was asked to do this panel, I said yes immediately, because just look at this incredibly talented, amazing group of writers. And then, I was told the theme would be Bad Man Don't Talk. And I was like, yes, I'll do whatever, yeah, whatever. And then I thought about it and I was like, masculinity, who cares? Honestly, because to some extent, my own lived experience is such where I feel like we've come so far with so many different movements. We've long moved beyond this binary notion of you must be one thing or another, and it's more fluid now. And so, but yet, for vast sections of the world, it is still a pressing sort of concern. And I think one of the duties of a writer is to hold up a mirror to society and to reflect the views of what people are thinking. So, and that's exactly what you're doing. I wanted to ask you, going back this way now, in that story, Splashdown, can you tell us a little bit about what that story is about? And can you tell us, how did that story come to be?
Okay, so there's a kind of main family of four who are featured in the book. And we follow them as they immigrate from Kingston, Jamaica to Miami. But then there's a cousin in the book, the two boys, their cousin Cookie. When he appears in a story called Splashdown, we meet him on the day that he's going to meet his father for the first time in the Florida Keys. His father abandoned him after about 2 months. His father's this white American who he comes to find out is a fisherman down in the Keys. And I really, the story came about because I wanted to explore the parallels between the younger son in the main family and then the cousin character, and explore the parallels between the kind of fraught relationships between the father and son. So the Topper, who's in that family of four I've been talking about, he's Trelawney's father. He doesn't abandon his family. He's present up until Trelawney's about 13. But he's this kind of, in a sense, this kind of like armchair dad who will be around on a Sunday to watch football. And then he goes out after work a lot to, in a sense, hang out, but he also believes that's where he's networking and that's how he's building up his own contractor business. But that creates a big strain in his own marriage. And so Ox comes back into Cookie's life now, and he becomes actually very involved in Cookie's maturation over the course of 4 summers. And he takes on this role where he's teaching Cookie how to essentially work the fishing business that he has. And there are a lot of good. There's a lot of good that does to Cookie's self-confidence as he's growing, as he's understanding how he can, be a man in the world, but also how he can create a future, job for himself, a future career for himself. He's reconnecting with this part of himself that he didn't know much about as he learns about what his father's been up to. And so there's these kinds of positive things, and I was interested in those two ideas of of kind of like bad dads in a sense, the one who's kind of technically around but not actually that interested in what his son is up to because he doesn't, maybe he doesn't like the sports that he likes, or he's not taking the same kind of interests, versus the one who is taking an interest, albeit he is teaching him a kind of more traditionally masculine role. But I also wanted to see, what the cost of trying to rebuild that relationship would look like for Cookie and Ox. And because Cookie was very much distracted with this idea of, why did my father abandon me? What kind of man abandons his son? And can I ever trust him again? And he gets into this position. He actually puts himself in a position, in a sense, where he puts himself in danger to understand and see, will my father rescue me? And you'd have to read it to see, the answer to that.
I mean, this story is incredible. It's very harrowing. And I mean, there's actually a moment where Cookie, I think, says, the reason why he came back to work with his father was because he wanted to see what kind of man he was. And by the end of the story, he discovers, not giving away too much, in a pretty harrowing way, I guess. And I mean, the ending of that story, did you always have that sense that that was going to be his sort of destiny? Because he's left literally swimming in his peril. I'll just leave it like that.
Okay, yeah.
Did you, I mean,
It's been out a year, so yeah.
please read the book. You absolutely must. But yeah, I mean, because for instance, just a few weeks ago, I think on this very stage, Morgan Talty, the short story writer,
great writer.
He talked about how he the story tells him when it's going to end. And I was wondering, was that the case with this story, or did you always know?
I have maybe two stories in the book that I kind of saw the ending first, and then I wrote back. I thought, well, if this is where it ends, what's the kind of arc reaching backwards, so that we have we can understand where the story begins, leading to that ending. And this is one of the two where I had the image of Cookie floating in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and looking up at his father, who's on a cigarette boat, and thinking, will he actually abandon me out here, or will he save me? And yeah, I mean, to me the power. I mean, I thought that was the powerful image when I began writing that story. But for me, what became more powerful is that, and what I discovered through writing was that there's a kind of part one and part two to the story. And when we meet him, it's the day he's going to meet his father. The beginning of part two is the day that Cookie's son is born. And he sees his son, and he's found himself in, financial precarity, as many of my characters do. And his immediate response is to run out of the delivery room. And it's not that he wants to abandon his son, but he thinks, what kind of world is my son? What have I created for my son? What kind of circumstance have I created for my son that we have nothing to offer him? And so he was promised this lobster trap business as his future, and so he immediately runs down to the Keys to see again if those promises that I was made by my father, can I depend on them now to save this new family that I've created? And yeah.
Let me tell you, men are dogs, right? Because like in all of these books, there's some very dramatic examples in your book, but even in your book, Kevin, there's a father he's trying to provide for his family, but he finds this most, destructive way to do it when he starts this affair with Molly. Was that something you were interested in exploring, the way fathers fail us?
I wasn't interested in exploring. I didn't always mean for them to be that attracted to, but they were attracted to each other. And the people he's talking about is Hansrad Sarup, who is from a very impoverished family. And after Dalton disappears, Marley, the wife, hires him as a sort of night watcher, security guard. Now, because now he has to stay in the same house with her at night, and who knows what happens to a man's soul at night when he stays in the same house with a younger woman. And he has his own family back at the barrack. And there was something that I wanted to explore he was seeing himself as almost doing a good thing. He was kind of pimping himself out in a way to get money from Mali. He really, really thought that he would get this money from her to provide for his family without, of course, telling his wife what he was doing. And I was thinking, like, when you use the word failure of the father, in his mind, that's not a failure to him. And I was thinking about what Roland was saying about you have to have a dichotomy, like a duality of self. If you get a bruise, you have to wear that as a badge, or it will only serve to invite more bruises. Anything that is considered affliction, you have to go to Spin City with that and make that into something good. So any failure that a man would have, he would have to spin that and say, I'm going to make this into a success. yeah, I'm sleeping with this other man, I'm gonna get this money from her to give to my family, and then that creates an entire web of insecurity and complexities between these two families. So it was more that I wanted to explore than just abject failure.
And Roland, so this is a panel of pretty formidable short story writers. Sketcher, your novel, also exists in a short story form. I wondered which came first, and tell us about where Sketcher came from.
Well, the conventional answer where Sketcher came from, it's true. It sounds kind of corny, but you sometimes, a character just starts talking and never shut up. That's it. That's it. So I was in a loft. I was entering this international competition, and I wrote about 6 stories, and I tried to be as Jamaican as possible. And then here comes this voice that's just starts saying, by the way, when Frika was 4, he sketched a picture of that cat that had a broken leg, and the cat got up and walked away. And I said, that's the guy. And I realized that he is actually who I wanted to be at 9 years old, growing up in a fundamentalist church. I wanted to speak my mind. So now I'm doing it retroactively. But he just never shuts up. He kind of says it. He investigates things in a particular way. So that short story, Full of Holes, was in the top 10 worldwide for a particular competition. And I literally got on a plane and went to London and then to Hull, overlooking the English Channel, to rub shoulders and try to get a book deal. And the rest is history/misery.
Did you always, was that very, there's a tricky daddy in that book as well.
Yeah, right,
Let's
right.
put it lightly.
Right, right. So Alaric Beaumont Skid Beaumont's father is a very thinly veiled version of my own. Very thinly veiled. I might as well just call the guy Hector or something, because that's his name. But that in every story or book that I write, if there is a role for a father, it's going to be that specter in the corner, that shadow in the corner. That's never there, but there's something about him that stains the house. Wow. All right? And I think now that I'm grown, I have a lot more objectivity about my father. A lot more objectivity. Forgave him, obviously, but I'm very objective now as to say, what does it mean? What kinds of pressures did he face? And earlier you asked, you said, well, do you think that the shadow of colonialism or affects people? I don't think anybody harks back, and even as things become more fluid in masculinity, I don't think anybody harks back going, oh yeah, I remember when they actually dragged me on a ship. But the idea though is that continues, and it continues in this way. It's almost like the Big Bang, where the radiation remains in the air, and all that radiation remains in the air. 2 civilizations clashed, and the smoke is still in the air, the dust is still in the air. And what some of those micro dust, the little ones that can get in your lungs and never come out, what it is the difference between what happens when somebody gets alone and I don't, based on the classism that still exists in Jamaica. Now, nobody wants to talk about that, and classism is based on race, but there is a particular classism that I found that my father didn't have an anger problem. He had a I don't get enough respect problem. Now, whether or not he was doing enough to get that respect is another matter, but there is a natural thing that comes from you that says, you don't get as much respect as this other guy. And he was very indignant about that. So he responded in a way that was sometimes overkill. My father used to live beside the primary school I went to, and I remember one day actually going to him and saying, listen, some guy took my lunch money. The brethren, get in the car. He walked into the car. He drove the car over to the school. He chased the little boy with the car. You don't chase a kid with the car. And the dude is running and screaming. And bad man, the dude he was crying. He was crying. And he was like, but your father's crazy. Your father's absolutely crazy. I don't think he was crazy. I don't think he had an anger problem. I think he had notions of, I don't get enough respect. And when you look at the background to that, he is the son of gentry. He's a son of gentry. He's the son of people who lived, in particular place at that time in the hills in Jamaica. And his mother was second generation Scottish. She made a point out of being second generation Scottish. When Mandela was free in the 90s, I remember being at her house and she says, oh, but him handsome man, I thought he was a black man. That's my grandmother, right? So he grew up with that. That's giving you a microcosm of what he grew up with and what she said and how she said it, right? So he grew up with that, not having any respect, and you add to that to exacerbate the problem that he had a brother, his same mother, different father, and his brother was, again, gentry, the different curl of hair and a different sense of skin, and he just basically said, well, you like him more than you like me. And that indignation followed him right through. It turned into hate. I think ancient practices, when he used ancient practices, it was all hate and harm. It was never healing and protection. And when I wrote an article, you asked me about a short story. When they wrote the article, My Father, Lessons from an Obeahman's Son, or My Father, the Obeahman, it was about saying, I took 20 years to write that. How do I now put my father in perspective? And I realized that he was a deeply, deeply indignant man who felt like he didn't get enough respect. That has roots in what we've all been through.
Yeah, and do you see an intersection, for instance, between class and masculinity and the different roles people are permitted to inhabit?
Yes, because again, I like what Kevin said just now, and Kevin is, always vulnerable. I find that in his writing, and I like that a lot because I can vicariously understand that. You can literally tell yourself that, and you think you're immune to that kind of thinking. You're not. You can tell yourself, based on the superstructure and the macro system that you're in, you can tell yourself, you can say, I'm immune to that, but you're not, because somehow something happens that makes you say, if I were X, I could make more money. If I were so-and-so, you'd respect me more. And this is on the home front now. You would respect me more if I made more money. Or you're comparing me to somebody else who makes more money. Or what do I do when somebody has bought something new and I can't afford to give that to my family? So it gets very complicated. And of course, it is not cut and dry. It is certainly not, black and white. But it really goes back to what are the ways that you consider your entire history to be about disenfranchisement? Did I pronounce that correctly? Disenfranchisement. Yeah.
I'm going to open up the floor to questions in a few minutes as the microphone is put into position. So Jonathan, yes, we have Roland in your book, the father of Ulrich, does some interesting things, and that passage that you read kind of highlights a lot of it. And there's more to come in the book. More is revealed about his grand gambit, his gamble to move his family into the swarm. Kevin, in your book, it's Hans, doing the best for his family by pimping himself out and having an affair. And it was also the absent Dalton, who is revealed to have, let's just put it mildly, a few issues. And then the plethora of male figures who are very, who have a lot going on. Do you think, all of you, or one of you, that there's a Caribbean masculinity? There's something that is distinctly unique about it, and is it a very broken sort of masculinity where, male figures are just disappointing everywhere you look? Everywhere.
I was gonna say, because I'll say it. I'll keep it brief. And I'll also skirt the question at the same time, which is, I worry. My next book, which I'm working on, under contract. This has nothing to do with what I pitched to the publishers when they bought the book, but I know I want good fathers in the book, and sometimes I read about whether it's fatherhood or just relationships or this kind of like constant failure on the part of people in general. And I would love to see good men back in, because sometimes we start to emulate what we're seeing, and we see these toxic relationships and we start to actually perform to do what feels comfortable and familiar to ourselves. I think like the one book I ever read with a good father is The Changeling, Victor Laval. It's like a great father in that book, and it's like I'd like to do more of that.
The Bible, Jesus, and
Y'all might kill me. No, part of what I wrote my book for is because I never really understood the story of Cain and Abel. I never really got it. I thought maybe some of the things that Cain was doing wrong was kind of arbitrary to me. I know. But and so I wanted to explore, my Topper. Why is Delano? Why is Delano Topper's favorite? To me, it's he's got a preferred eye color for him, and so to me it's arbitrary. So. Yeah, so the changeling.
Terrible thing to describe your son as defective. I mean, come on, no. We have to wrap up very shortly, actually. I don't know if anybody has a question. Thank you, yes. Please use the microphone that is at the back.
Okay, thank you so much for this. I love this whole conversation. I was really interested in what you guys were saying about literature and writing being presented as more feminine, especially because I feel like my entry here in New York into Caribbean literature was with a lot of men, like Derek Walcott and Naipaul and all of that. And so I guess I was curious about that relationship between it being considered feminine, and yet like sometimes it also feels like the male Caribbean voice is more like prestigious,
It's really all over the place, isn't it? It's very contradictory. Maybe it's a question of, you're 41, or I don't know how, 42, sorry. I don't know how old these people are, but I am, maybe, sorry.
The last 4 digits of my social are 1, 2, 3, 4.
I don't know if it's a question of the generations changing, that this long and slow, arc towards history improving itself and real change happening is very slow. And we existed in that generation where that's what we were subjected to, and it will take maybe, I don't know how long it's going to take forever for that to trickle up the hierarchy of the publishing industry, and to actually, I don't know if it means change is inevitable, change is coming, and that you are part of that change.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
It's been a wonderful event. Do buy all of these books, which are available for sale outside. Everybody will sign copies.
Also, feel free to buy drinks and stick around for the poets coming later.
Not a sound. Ring the alarm, hey, whoa. Ring the alarm, and not a sound is dying. I know. Ring the alarm, and not a sound is dying. Let me hear you sing. Hey, ring the alarm, and not a sound. Whoa, hey, just ring the alarm, and not a sound. All right. Yes, some sound so like a big town fan. Listen the sound, the champion. Rock the dance in any session. Rock up the woman, rock up the man. Ring the alarm, and not a sound is dying. Oh, ring the alarm, and not a sound is suffering. Oh, hey, Tita told me them on in a row. Lucky one, what about your holding toe? Tita told me them all in a row. Takasma, what about 13 toes? Ring the alarm, and not a sound is dying. Oh, hey, just ring the Charlie, rock Miss Monty, talk of the country. So ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Oh, hey, just ring the alarm. I want to see you all dancing, Lord God no. And if you're happy and you love me, you tell me go on. You're happy and you love me, you tell me go on. If you're happy and you love me, come tell me go on. Happy and you love me, just tell me go on. Ring the alarm, the tennis on ya. And I love you, so you better ring the alarm. Lord God no, ring the alarm. Hey, four big sound in a one big line. The dance sound I play the other three keep calm. Four big sound in a one big line. The boom sound I play the other three keep calm. Ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Oh, another sound is dying. Let me say yeah, yeah, reggae, reggae. Remember this sound is the talk of the town, talk of the country. Rock Mr. Charlie, rock Miss Monty, talk of the country. Sing along, ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Oh, hey, ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Watch the sound man a tremble, watch the sound man a play, watch the sound man a tremble, watch the sound man a play. Just a ring the alarm, another sound is dying. Lord, yeah, them whoa. Ring the alarm, Lord, no, because another sound died. Another sound died. Another sound died. Thank you.
Africa.